Hi, I'm Maura. They said, you have to care for her, like it was a favor, like I was lucky to be chosen. But while my parents and siblings sipped cocktails in Hawaii, I was left alone in a mansion with my niece, who was supposedly mute, bedridden, unresponsive. Only she wasn't. She moved, she spoke. And what she whispered that night made my blood run cold. Why would a child pretend to be paralyzed for 5 years? Why would a family build a lie that elaborate? And what happens when the quiet one in the family finally speaks up? I never expected a lukewarm cup of coffee to be the last thing that felt normal. That Tuesday morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds, like it was trying to coax me out of bed with false promises. I sat at the kitchen table of my modest apartment in Savannah, Georgia, tapping the rim of my ceramic mug with a fingernail, going over a mental list of job sites I'd planned to check again. The school district had laid me off 3 months earlier due to budget cuts. My severance was drying up, and the quiet was starting to sound like failure. The ring startled me more than it should have. I reached for the phone with hesitation, already guessing who it might be. Caller ID confirmed it. Mom. I answered with a soft, "Hey." Her voice came through smooth, polished, deliberate. "Sweetheart, I have something I need to tell you. Not ask, tell." There was that tone, velvet on the outside, iron underneath. "Your father, Vera, James, and I are heading to Hawaii. Last-minute trip. Business and rest. You know how things are. We need you to stay with Isolde." I blinked, coffee halfway to my lips. "What do you mean, stay with her?" "She can't be left alone, Maura. Her caregiver had to leave suddenly. Vera's got her hands full, and we trust you." She breezed right past my silence. "You're not working, and you're the only one without a family to juggle. It's just for a few days." No request, just an assignment, like I was some stand-in nursemaid because I was available, or maybe expendable. "You already bought the tickets?" I asked, knowing the answer before she replied. "Of course. We leave Thursday. A car will pick you up tomorrow morning at 10. Be ready." She hung up before I could say anything more. I sat there, phone still in my hand, coffee now cold. The only sound in the room was the low hum of the refrigerator and the rapid beat of my pulse in my ears. Later that afternoon, I opened the family group chat out of curiosity. Vera had forwarded flight confirmations. 5 seats to Maui. No mention of me. Not even a courtesy copy. Just Vera, her husband, my parents, and James. I thought back to a dinner last month, Vera saying, "Let's keep it small this year, just immediate family." She looked me straight in the eye when she said it. Now I understood. I wasn't part of immediate. I'd always played the role. The helper, the fixer, the reliable one. I didn't argue at birthdays when they gave Vera credit for cakes I baked. I didn't flinch when Dad bragged about James's career, but never mentioned mine. I stayed silent at Thanksgiving when Cressida announced Vera's fundraising work, as if she hadn't raised a dime through exploitation. I said nothing, because silence kept the peace. Now, silence had made me a convenient solution. Still, I said yes. I couldn't quite explain why. Maybe it was habit, or guilt, or some deep hope that this time, doing the right thing might feel right. The next morning, the black SUV arrived on time. No one called to check if I needed help. I packed my own bags, left the apartment key under the mat for the landlord, and climbed in without fanfare. The mansion was exactly as I remembered. Massive, cold, spotless. It echoed with too much space and not enough love. The housekeeper gave me a stiff nod and disappeared. Vera's care instructions sat on the kitchen island in a laminated binder. Neat tabs marked medication, schedule, and emergency contacts. It read more like a legal document than notes about a child. A note scrawled in her signature purple pen read, "Make sure she doesn't skip her 2 p.m. dosage. She gets fussy." Fussy? I followed the instructions to find Isolde in the back sunroom, positioned by the window in her motorized wheelchair. She was 8, pale, still. Her long brown hair was brushed straight, her hands limp in her lap. Eyes blank, unmoving, staring through the glass at nothing. "Hi, sweetie, I'm Maura," I said, voice light. "I'll be staying with you for a few days." She didn't react, just blinked, slow, indifferent. I smiled anyway. Someone had to. That evening, I unpacked in the guest suite. The bed was too firm, the sheets too stiff, and the silence too loud. As I put away my toiletries, I noticed a coloring book on the nightstand. It was open to a half-finished page. The crayons were recent, the lines just slightly pressed, meaning someone had worked on it recently. Strange, I thought. Everyone had insisted Isolde couldn't move much, that she hadn't responded in years. And yet, that night, I turned in early, or tried to. Around 1 a.m., I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, soft. I froze. The hallway creaked, then silence. I got out of bed, heart racing, and checked on Isolde. She was still there, still seated in her chair, still facing the window, still not moving. I turned to leave the room, and then I saw it. The door. I had closed it. Now it was open. The morning air inside that house felt heavier than it had any right to. The kind of quiet that makes you whisper without knowing why. I padded down the long hallway in socks, the floorboards barely creaking beneath me, and past a portrait of Gideon that hung like a warning at the stairwell's bend. I made coffee that I didn't want, and scrambled 2 eggs that went cold on the plate while I stood watching Isolde. She was in the same sunroom, in the same position, with the same blank stare fixed on the same glass window. I tried speaking to her again. "Morning, sweetheart. Hungry?" Nothing. I spooned a bit of her prescribed blend into her mouth, slow and steady like the binder said. She swallowed automatically. No resistance, no engagement. As I wiped the corner of her mouth with a cloth napkin, Cressida's voice echoed in my head, sickly sweet. "You've always had the softest heart, Maura. That's why we trust you." It had sounded like love the first dozen times. Now it felt like strategy. I wasn't the best choice. I was the quiet one, the compliant one, the one who didn't question. When I cleaned up, I opened the email from Vera again. It had come late the night before I arrived. A list of care notes that read more like image management instructions. One line stuck with me, even more than the rest. "Keep her tidy at all times. Last time the caregiver let her smell, and we were mortified in front of the Rotary Club." Mortified in front of a club, not heartbroken for a child. I clicked my tongue and shook my head. Their concern wasn't about health. It was about headlines. I stared at the screen, rereading that line until it blurred. That's when I decided. I would document everything, every word, every change, every shift in Isolde's breathing if I had to. Not for them, for her, and for me. After finishing the dishes, I walked through the house. The place looked more like a hotel than a home. Crisp white curtains, no fingerprints on the glass, books arranged by color, not by subject. Not a single family photo in sight, unless it was curated and framed like a magazine ad. I counted 3 hidden security cameras just in the downstairs common areas, 2 more at the upstairs landing. And for what? A child who couldn't walk? Back in Isolde's room, I noticed a coloring book tucked between 2 picture books on a small side table. I pulled it out and flipped through it slowly. One page was done carefully, crayons staying inside the lines, almost too neatly. A few pages later, another image was halfway complete, with color shading that showed an attention to contrast. But Vera had said Isolde hadn't moved her hands in months. Lifting my phone discreetly, I snapped a photo. Later in the afternoon, I took Isolde to her nap per the schedule. She didn't resist, didn't fuss. As I bent to place a blanket over her, I dropped a pen by accident. It clinked softly on the wooden floor. And I saw it. Her right eyelid twitched. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but it was there. She hadn't flinched when I spoke, hadn't blinked when the light changed, but the sudden sound? A reaction. Not reflexive like digestion or breath. It was awareness. I sat back down slowly and reached for the notebook I'd begun keeping. Page 1. Isolde blinked at unexpected sound. 3:12 p.m. Right eye. No other movement. I kept writing. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being observant. Dinner was silent, just me and the child. I sat across from her at the small kitchen table, sipping the same bland coffee as that morning. I studied her more than I should have, trying not to let my mind spiral into possibilities. After tucking her in again, I stepped outside onto the back porch and watched the trees sway. My fingers traced the edge of my coffee mug, while my thoughts drifted backward. I remembered a Thanksgiving when I was 12. I had spent the whole morning setting the table while Mom and Vera cooked. I matched the silverware to the place settings and folded the napkins in a triangle the way I saw on a Martha Stewart show. I'd even lit the candles, carefully using the long wooden matches from the drawer. When Cressida walked in, she barely glanced at the table. "Don't touch the silverware," she snapped. "You always misplace things." She blew out the candles and reset the whole table without a word. I hadn't tried to help after that, not in any way that could be seen. And now, here I was, all over again, being helpful, being quiet, being overlooked. But this time, I was watching back. The next morning started with a silence so unnatural, I almost asked it to speak. I moved through the kitchen, filling the kettle, grabbing toast I didn't want, all while watching Isolde out of the corner of my eye. Her wheelchair faced the window as always, the sun outlining her silhouette like she belonged in a painting, motionless, expressionless, unreachable. I carried her breakfast tray to the table, setting it down softly. As I turned, a spoon slipped from the counter, hitting the tile with a sharp clink. Just a spoon, just a sound. And she flinched. It was slight, barely there. But I saw it. A subtle jerk in her left shoulder, like her body had betrayed her for just a moment. I didn't react, not with words anyway. I just stood there, staring, pretending to fix the napkin on the tray, while my brain screamed behind my calm face. Something isn't right. That afternoon, while she napped, or at least pretended to, I decided to do more than wonder. I started in the hallway closet. Vera had said the house was equipped with everything necessary for Isolde's care. But the shelves told a different story. Boxes of unopened gloves, IV kits still sealed, a wheelchair cushion in its original packaging. Things listed as essential had clearly never been touched. Why keep them at all? Aesthetic? Legality? I jotted notes in the small spiral I found in my purse. Inventory mismatch. Supplies unused. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a faint hum. Not the HVAC, not the fridge. Different, higher pitched. Curious, I turned on my bedside lamp. The hum disappeared. I scanned the room. There, just above the doorframe, a tiny red light blinking softly. I stood on the edge of the bed and reached up. A small black lens peered back at me, no larger than a nickel. I followed the molding into the hallway, spotting another above the stairwell. And then I went to Isolde's room. I stood outside her door, hand hovering over the knob. Then I pushed it open. She was awake, barely blinking, eyes wide. I didn't say a word, just followed the edge of the ceiling, and there it was, above the corner near her bed. Another red blink. Watching. Recording. My breath caught. I left the room slowly, careful not to disturb her, and returned to mine. I pulled out an old leather notebook from my bag. I'd brought it thinking I'd write recipes or jot job ideas. Instead, it became a record. Cameras found, hallway, guest bedroom, Isolde's room, red light detected, lens direction toward bed. I dated the entry, underlined it twice, and slid the notebook under my pillow. The next day, while Isolde was in her chair near the garden doors, I noticed a second coloring book hidden under her mattress. I didn't want to pry, but I did. And what I found told me more than any file in Vera's binder ever could. 4 pages colored in full. not random scribbles. A rainbow sorted by hue, an animal with shading under its paws, a tree trunk textured like bark. A level of control and attention impossible for someone declared non-responsive. I snapped photos, backdated them in my notebook. Cognitive awareness suspected, artistic control evident. The morning after that, I tried something deliberate. I stood in front of Isolde with 2 mugs, one full of tea, one with her prescribed shake. I dropped a spoon again, this time on purpose. Her eyes shifted, not her head, not a reflex, but her gaze darted toward the sound, then back. I knelt beside her, quiet, calm, and said, "I saw that, honey." She didn't react, but the air between us felt charged. Later that night, I sat at the foot of her bed. The soft nightlight cast a pale orange glow on the walls. I whispered, "Can you hear me, Isolde?" She didn't nod. She didn't blink, but a tear rolled down her right cheek. Not both. Just one. I don't know what it takes for a child to hold in everything like that. I don't know how long she's been waiting for someone to notice, to not look away. But I knew then. I wasn't imagining things. That tear said more than any word she could have spoken, and it broke something inside me. I woke before the sun, my body wired with attention I hadn't earned through rest. Lying there, listening to the whir of the ceiling fan, I replayed yesterday's moment in Isolde's room. Her tear, that flicker of life behind her gaze. It haunted me. I sat up, swung my legs over the side of the bed, and grabbed my notebook from the nightstand. I reviewed what I'd recorded so far. Blinks, eye movements, the coloring pages, the blinking red light above her bed, the spoon test. It all pointed in the same direction. Someone was lying, and it wasn't Isolde. In the hallway, I passed by a linen closet I'd opened before, but never really searched. This time, I moved deliberately. I pulled out towels, sheets, an old heating pad. Then I saw it. Wedged between 2 stacks of tablecloths was a plain beige folder with no label. I opened it slowly. Inside were invoices. Dozens of them. All from different medical supply companies, with dates going back 2 years. Oxygen masks, hospital beds, feeding tubes. Most had "delivered" stamped on them, but many items I'd never seen in the house. Then I noticed something worse. Several of the invoices were billed to a P.O. box I didn't recognize. Not the mansion's address. Not the main house. Not even Vera's office. Why would medical equipment be shipped somewhere else? The receipts weren't just sloppy, they were suspicious. A pattern emerged. Items ordered, charged to Isolde's care, but never accounted for in the home. My heart pounded as I tucked the folder under my arm and went straight to the formal hallway. The one lined with those smug family photos, and one prominently displayed medical certificate. I stared at the framed report on the wall. Patient, Isolde Montgomery. Diagnosis, advanced neurological degeneration. Ongoing palliative care recommended. I'd seen it a dozen times. They liked to showcase it like a shield, but something gnawed at me. Back in my room, I opened the folder again. There, among the loose sheets, was another medical report. Same doctor, same hospital, same date. But this one read, "Patient presents within normal developmental parameters. No observable neurological impairment." Same paper, same format, but completely different outcomes. I laid them side by side on the desk. One was meant to be seen. The other was meant to be buried. I took photos of both. Then, I reached for the medication log Vera had left in the care binder. It was color-coded, printed, and precise. Or so it seemed. But the log said the nurse administered Isolde's medication on the 4th, 5th, and 6th of the previous month. I checked the rotation calendar on the fridge. The nurse was out of state for family reasons those days. The log was forged. My hands trembled as I flipped through more of Vera's notes. One printed sheet caught my eye. If she twitches, don't react. That only encourages her. Stay consistent. Keep language clinical. Emotion is a distraction. Compliance is kindness. Kindness? My throat tightened. I marched into the bathroom, clutching the fake report and Vera's notes. I set them on the counter and looked up at myself in the mirror. "They're drugging this child," I whispered, "and I've been helping them." A tear rolled down my cheek, not from guilt, from fury. I let it fall. Then I wiped it away and left the room. That evening, after putting Isolde to bed, I made my way into Gideon's office. The room smelled like cigar boxes and old money, mahogany and manipulation. His desk drawer had a lock on it, but I'd grown up in this house. I knew every shortcut. I grabbed a bobby pin from my bun, bent it, and fumbled for the mechanism. Click. Inside the drawer was a file labeled Drafts. One paper stood out immediately. It was another version of the medical report. This one had red ink across the top. Draft, for review only. It matched the hidden version I'd found earlier. Tucked behind it was a handwritten note on Gideon's legal pad. Start sedation increase by end of quarter. Justify with increased spasticity. Avoid new consultation. Too risky. That's when my stomach turned. He hadn't just signed off on false records. He was planning the next phase. It was barely past noon, and the house already felt heavy with secrets. The kind that settled into walls, into furniture, into the quiet. I moved around the kitchen like I had every other day, chopping, stirring, organizing. I wasn't hungry, but I made lunch anyway. Muscle memory. When I brought Isolde her food, I placed the tray gently on the table beside her and turned to the sink. Then I froze. Her right hand shifted, just slightly, beneath the blanket draped over her lap. The movement was subtle, hesitant, but deliberate. That made it the second time in as many days she'd moved on her own. I walked back to her slowly, trying not to alarm her. I reached for a spoon and set it beside her elbow, within reach, but not obviously so. Her eyes didn't follow me, but her fingers twitched again, like maybe she was waiting for me to leave. I didn't leave. That night, after her bath, I wrapped her in one of the soft cotton throws from the hall closet and tucked her into bed. I sat next to her in the low light and spoke barely above a whisper. "If you're still in there," I said, "I want you to know. I believe you, even if you don't say anything." "I see you." Her lips parted. At first I thought it was just her breathing, but then a sound emerged, raw, broken, soft like a prayer. "They'll hurt you too, if they know I talk." I froze, my breath catching in my chest. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. Those 7 words shattered something in me. She could speak, and she had been silent for so long, not because she couldn't, but because she was protecting me, or herself, or both. I reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. I squeezed gently. "No one's going to hurt us," I whispered, though I wasn't entirely sure it was true. Not if I have anything to say about it. After she fell asleep, I stepped into the living room and sat on the couch, staring out into the garden through the glass doors. My body trembled, not from fear, but fury. My fists clenched until my nails pressed into my palms. I had been part of it. Not by intent, but by inaction. I had administered pills, followed Vera's schedules, played my role. Never again. I needed someone, anyone, who might confirm I wasn't losing my mind, that this wasn't all in my head. The next afternoon, I walked down the gravel path, past the back hedges, and crossed the street to Mr. Ballinger's place. I made up a story about the water pressure in the guest bathroom and asked if he had ever experienced plumbing issues. He handed me a glass of lemonade before settling into his porch chair. "Funny thing," he said mid-sip, "I heard the little one talk once." My heart skipped. He continued, like it wasn't the most damning thing anyone could say out loud. "Couple months ago, I was out back pruning roses. Window was open. Thought I heard her say, 'Mama,' just once. Soft." I stared at him. He didn't elaborate. Didn't follow it with a question or apology. He just looked at me. And in that stare, I saw something I hadn't seen in weeks. Confirmation. Back at the mansion, I found Isolde already in her chair, upright. She wasn't leaning on the armrest like usual. Her spine had a tension to it, as if she were willing herself to hold that pose. Our eyes met. She didn't blink, neither did I. "I know now," I told her, "and I'm not going anywhere. We'll do this together. Quiet, but loud enough to matter." That evening, I sat on the rug beside her chair and tried something different. Simple yes or no questions. "Do they give you something that makes you tired?" One blink. "Do you remember how to talk?" One blink. "Are you scared?" One blink. Slow, deliberate, heartbreaking. I swallowed hard, my throat thick. "Okay," I whispered. "We'll go slow, but we'll go." She didn't move again that night. But just before I left the room, I heard her voice again. Even softer this time. "Please help me." I stood over the sink, spoon in one hand, pill bottle in the other. The label screamed its prescription strength, carefully dosed by Vera's favorite private doctor, the one who called twice a year and billed like he'd flown in. My fingers didn't shake as I popped the cap and dumped the crushed white powder into the drain. I turned on the faucet and watched it swirl away. The blender hummed behind me, mixing the rest of Isolde's shake. Milk, banana, a spoonful of peanut butter. Something normal, something kind. I logged the dose as administered at 8:02 a.m., just as Vera would expect. It was the first deliberate lie I'd told them, but I knew the difference between compliance and complicity now. Isolde sat in her chair near the window, eyes watching me. No, not watching, tracking. I brought her the cup and held it to her lips. She drank slowly, her eyes sharper than they'd been in days. Maybe longer. "You're safe," I said quietly, not sure if it was true, but needing to say it anyway. By noon, she was different, brighter, awake. Her hands twitched, then stilled. When I asked if she wanted to move to the other side of the room, she whispered, almost too soft to catch, "I feel not sleepy." It hit me harder than I expected. That afternoon, while folding laundry, the phone rang. I answered out of habit. Vera's voice was syrupy. "Just checking in on my little angel. Everything stable?" I smiled into the receiver. "Still the same." "Good," she said quickly. "Consistency is key. No changes, no surprises. Understood?" It wasn't a question. It was a command wrapped in faux concern. "Of course," I replied. "No surprises." After hanging up, I walked into the office, sat at the desk, and opened the laptop. I typed Isolde Montgomery into the search bar. The first result was a site I'd never seen, hopeforisolde.org. My blood ran cold. The homepage featured a glossy photo of Vera speaking at a podium, with Isolde's image projected behind her. The tagline read, "A mother's fight for her daughter's dignity." I scrolled. Testimonials, donation buttons, photos of Vera at fundraisers, pull quotes that read like tabloid sympathy bait. "I will never stop fighting for my silent child." The donation counter showed over $83,000 raised this year alone. None of that money went toward Isolde's actual care. I knew it, and they knew I wouldn't ask. I bookmarked every page, screenshotted everything, printed the donation page twice. That night, as I changed Isolde into her pajamas, I noticed something odd. A floorboard near the foot of her bed sat higher than the rest. I pressed on it gently. It gave slightly under pressure. I grabbed a butter knife from the hallway drawer and wedged it under the edge. The board popped free with a quiet creak. Beneath it was a small cloth-wrapped bundle. My stomach turned. Inside, a worn notebook, small, handmade, with fabric sewn to its cover. I opened it carefully. The handwriting was small and neat, unmistakably a child's. Today she pinched me. I wanted to talk, but I was scared. I said a word when I was alone. She yelled and said not to be bad. She made me drink the bad juice again. Entry after entry, chronicling moments I hadn't been here to see. The silence, the punishment, the stolen voice. I copied the contents page by page. I backed it up onto my USB. Then I backed that up again onto a second drive, tucked into a Ziploc bag and hidden inside the freezer behind a pack of frozen peas. I printed key pages and stashed them in the trunk of my car. This time, if they came back early, I wouldn't be caught off guard. I wouldn't be cornered. I wouldn't let them erase her. At 10:14 p.m., I turned off the lights, checked the locks, and crept into the hallway to double-check Isolde's door. That's when I heard it. A metallic click, the front gate latch. I hadn't buzzed anyone in. No one was expected. I froze. And in that moment, I knew. Someone had come back before they were supposed to. It was 3:12 a.m. when I heard the chime from the gate. I'd just drifted off to sleep, my body finally surrendering after another day of holding too much, seeing too much. The sound snapped me awake. Not loud, but clear, as if the house itself had inhaled sharply. I pulled the curtain aside and saw headlights moving up the drive. Not a delivery truck, not a neighbor. Vera's SUV. My breath caught. She wasn't due for 2 more days. There had been no calls, no messages, no changes to the schedule. And yet, there she was, stepping out in her expensive flats, dragging a suitcase behind her with one hand and carrying a takeaway cup in the other, like this was a casual drop-in. She rang the bell, twice, sharp, like she owned every second of my next move. I opened the door before it could ring a third time. "Oh, good," she smiled, too wide. "You're up." "It's after 3, I said, unable to hide the confusion. "Flight changes, business call in Charleston, last-minute pivot," she shrugged. "Thought we'd surprise you. You know, see how things are going." She stepped inside before I could say anything else. Her eyes scanned the foyer, the walls, the side table, a mental checklist in real time. "Where's Lily?" "In bed. Asleep." Her smile faded just slightly. "Good. She needs stability." She walked past me like she still lived here, heading down the hall, peeking into the kitchen, the den. I followed her to the guest room, where she dropped her bag and said, almost absently, "You've done well, kept her quiet." The way she said quiet made my skin crawl. The next morning, I did exactly what I knew I had to. I made the shake as usual, just without the pills. Logged it, marked the time, set the cup on the counter where I knew Vera would see it, untouched. She entered the kitchen just as I picked it up again. "She still takes the full dose?" she asked, voice sweet. "Every drop," I replied, steady. She nodded. "Good. Routine matters. She needs to be managed properly." I watched her over the rim of my mug as she moved through the room, fingers gliding over surfaces. She was assessing, and she didn't bother hiding it. Later that afternoon, I found Isolde sitting straighter than usual in her chair. But when Vera walked into the room, she went still. Completely still. Her eyes didn't follow movement. Her fingers didn't twitch. She reverted to the version of herself they expected. And I watched it happen. Like she'd been flipped off, like a switch. That night, I heard her sobbing, barely audible, from behind her closed door. She didn't cry for herself. She cried because she had to pretend again. By the next morning, I'd moved into motion. First, I copied every file, photo, video clip, and note onto a second USB. I hid it in a hollowed-out book on the third shelf of the library, spine cracked just enough to look untouched. Then I packed an overnight bag and tucked the first USB into a shampoo bottle I'd hollowed out with a steak knife. Childish, maybe, but effective. "She'll go through my drawers," I muttered. I know her. At breakfast, Vera sipped black coffee and picked at a croissant. She wore a pastel cardigan and the kind of smile that should have belonged to a politician. "You've always been so loyal, Maura. That's why we trusted you with Isolde." I said nothing. Let her keep talking. I'd hate for anything to misunderstand you, especially now that we're stabilizing her condition. There it was. Not a compliment, a warning. "Understood," I replied, flat. She smiled wider. "Perfect." By midday, she dropped the other shoe. "Mom, Dad, and James are flying in tonight, just for a night. They miss Lily. They want to see how well you've done. It wasn't phrased as a question. And just like that, I had less than 18 hours to get everything in place. Because the ones who built this lie were coming home. And this time, I wasn't just the caretaker. I was the witness. They arrived just before 6. Cressida, Gideon, and James, all in a sleek black SUV that barely crunched the gravel. The driver barely looked up as he unloaded their luggage. They stepped out like they were walking into a gala, not a home where they'd left a child paralyzed, silenced, drugged. Vera stood by the front door, arms open like she'd rehearsed it. I stayed back, watching. The foyer filled with greetings that were too loud, hugs that were too quick. Cressida's perfume hit the air before she spoke. "Darling, you look pale," she said to me with a tilt of her head, as if concern came naturally. It didn't. Gideon barely acknowledged me, his eyes sweeping the house, as if checking for dust on his reputation. James gave me a tight nod. We hadn't spoken in months, and I was fine keeping that record intact. We sat down to dinner in the formal dining room. Vera had arranged it all: linen napkins, her favorite white porcelain, a bottle of overpriced wine already breathing beside Gideon's seat. She carved turkey like a pageant mom doing a holiday spread. Isolde sat at the head of the table, as instructed, propped up and blank as expected. "She's looking well," Cressida said, but her eyes didn't land on Isolde's. "She's peaceful," Vera chimed in, "thanks to Maura's diligence." They all turned to me, and I forced a smile. "You've always been sensitive, dear," Cressida added, pouring herself another glass. "It's part of your charm, even if it gets in the way sometimes." I could feel my jaw tighten. Then Vera slid a manila folder across the table toward Gideon. "We've had the papers drawn up," she said casually, like she was commenting on the weather. "Just in case anything feels unstable." My heart pounded in my chest. I knew what that meant. They were preparing to seize control, legally, permanently. I reached under the table and brushed the back of Isolde's hand twice. She blinked. Then she moved. Slowly, carefully, she pushed herself away from the table and stood, on her own. The room froze. Cressida's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. Vera's knife paused over the turkey breast. James's eyes widened. Gideon's fingers curled around his fork like it was a weapon. Isolde's legs wobbled, but she straightened them. Her voice came out small but unshaken. "Grandma!" "I remember." Silence fell. "You left me in the dark," she said, louder this time. "You all did." Cressida's hand flew to her chest. What is this?" "She's confused," Gideon barked. "She doesn't know what she's saying." Vera's eyes darted to me, panic rising. "Maura, what did you do? What did you—" I stood slowly and opened the leather notebook I'd kept in my lap the entire meal. "You manipulated all of us," I said. I walked to the center of the room and placed the diary on the table. "Here's her handwriting. You remember that, don't you, Vera? Since you had her write thank you notes every Christmas to your donors?" I pulled out printed screenshots, donation totals, medical documents, copies of the logbooks. "You said she couldn't write, couldn't move, couldn't speak." Delaney stepped through the dining room archway like she belonged there. She carried her briefcase like a badge. "I'm here to formally request a custody review," she said flatly, looking directly at Gideon. "Get out!" he snapped. "I'm not speaking to you," she replied. For the first time in my life, no one in that family had anything to say. Vera's face went slack. James stood up and walked out of the room without a word. Cressida was frozen mid-breath, and Gideon didn't blink. He just glared. Isolde reached for my hand. "I don't want to go back with them," she whispered. I squeezed her fingers gently, not to reassure her, but to reassure myself. And in that single sentence, she gave me more strength than any adult in my family ever had. The silence after the storm always lands heavier than the storm itself. No one shouted. No one moved. No chairs scraped. No one touched the food. The only sound in the room was the soft wheeze of Isolde's breathing. Hers, not manufactured by a machine, not muted by sedatives. Vera was the first to leave the table, jaw tight, hands trembling slightly, as she gathered her purse and walked out. Cressida dabbed at her lipstick with a napkin, not saying a word, her eyes never lifting from her untouched plate. James muttered something to no one and followed Vera. Only Gideon remained seated, elbows on the table, fingers interlaced, staring at the floor like he was calculating damage. I guided Isolde upstairs, helping her into bed with the gentlest touch I could manage. She lay down without protest. I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and whispered, "You did everything right." She gave me one small nod. That was all either of us could afford. By morning, the mood in the house was a fragile thread stretched too thin. Vera didn't appear for breakfast, neither did James. Cressida sat at the far end of the table, stirring her tea in slow, deliberate circles. She didn't make eye contact once. Delaney called just before 10. "It's in," she said. "The emergency petition for temporary custody has been filed. It'll trigger an evaluation and court response within 72 hours. Will it be enough?" I asked. "It's a start," she replied. "She's safe, for now." Safe for now. The most hopeful sentence I'd heard in weeks. Later that day, as I crossed the hallway on my way to Isolde's room, Gideon stepped out from the study and closed the door behind him with that practiced hush of power. "Maura," he said smoothly. I didn't stop walking. He followed. "You think this little stunt of yours will hold?" he asked. "The judge will see through it. The public? Give it a week. You'll lose the house, your name, your career." I turned slowly, grounding myself. "You already lost something more important, her." His jaw twitched. "You'll regret this. I promise you that." "I think we're well past the point of promises, Gideon." He didn't answer, just stared. That evening, Delaney came by in person. Her laptop bag was slung over one shoulder, and her face looked drawn, alert. "I found something," she said without preamble. "There's a clip. You missed it. It was buried in the cloud, probably auto-uploaded by the home security system." She opened her laptop and played the video. The image showed Isolde, weeks earlier, in the sunroom. She shifted in her seat, struggling to stand. Her legs trembled, and she got partway up before collapsing into the armrest. Seconds later, Vera entered the frame and slapped her. Hard. The footage cut out there, but that was enough. "I didn't know it existed," I whispered. Delaney closed the screen. "It existed because someone forgot to delete it fast enough. This will help." That night, the judge issued a preliminary protective order. Vera was officially barred from contacting Isolde. No visits, no calls, nothing. HopeForIsolde.org was pulled offline within 24 hours. The site was replaced with a plain white page, under legal review. A single line of text beneath it read, "This fundraiser is currently suspended pending investigation." Justice was beginning to whisper. The next day, I received a voicemail from James. "I didn't know it was this bad. I thought it was just Mom exaggerating again. I've hired a lawyer. I'm out." I played it twice to make sure I wasn't imagining it. James had always been silent, not out of loyalty, but convenience. But even he was peeling away from the center now. The web they'd spun for so long was fraying, and they couldn't sew it fast enough. But Gideon wouldn't unravel. He would strike harder before he fell. The courtroom felt colder than it should have, even for a building wrapped in marble and arrogance. I sat beside Delaney at the petitioner's table, my hands flat against my skirt, willing them not to tremble. On the other side, Gideon's attorney flipped through a folder, calm and rehearsed, like this was just another day of defending the indefensible. Vera didn't show, not even a call. The judge, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and no tolerance for drama, reviewed the files Delaney had submitted. Isolde's diary entries, the medication logs, the slap footage, and the medical reports marked draft, that Gideon had tried to hide. After 30 minutes, she cleared her throat and spoke in a tone that silenced the air. Given the presented evidence, the court grants temporary full custody to Maura Dalton, pending a formal hearing. This ruling is effective immediately. Delaney nodded beside me. I didn't breathe until the gavel struck. Outside the courthouse, reporters buzzed like flies near a dropped pie. Someone had leaked the slap footage to a local station. The headline spread fast. Former charity leader accused of child abuse. They paired it with a photo of Vera looking proud behind a podium, Isolde's image projected behind her. Silent, sedated, staged. HopeForIsolde.org vanished overnight. Donors pulled support. The foundation's main sponsor issued a statement. We were misled. Every contact Vera had built her persona on evaporated before she could even give a rebuttal. But Gideon wasn't the type to slink away. He caught me as I exited the side door of the building, just beyond where the cameras could reach. You think the law protects you? He said, voice low. I've buried bigger problems than you. I met his gaze without flinching. You're not as feared as you used to be. He stepped closer, teeth clenched. Don't call me father again. I leaned in, matching his tone. You made sure I never did. He didn't answer, just stared with a fury that couldn't find a target. The next day, James surprised everyone, including me. He walked into Delaney's office and gave a sworn statement, confirmed the fundraisers were staged, the documents forged. He handed over emails from Vera, urging him to stay quiet for the family's sake. His guilt was visible in every line of his face, but at least he showed up. That put him 2 steps ahead of the rest. By week's end, the state had launched a formal investigation into the physician who signed Isolde's records. The man resigned before he could be suspended. Delaney suspected he'd flip for a deal. We filed a civil suit for guardianship fraud and medical abuse. Delaney warned me it could take months, maybe years. But I didn't care. I had already won what mattered most. That evening, I sat in the garden, our garden now, where Isolde once sat slumped, blank, unreachable. Now she played with a small set of blocks, humming to herself under the shade of a dogwood tree. She glanced at me, smiled, and went back to stacking towers. I thought about everything we'd lost, everything she would never get back. But I also thought about what she'd gained. A voice, a witness, a future. There is no greater agony, I whispered, than bearing an untold story inside you. Maya Angelou's words, and mine, because telling the truth was just the beginning. Learning how to live with it would be the next. A month passed, like a soft exhale after a long scream. The rental cottage we moved into sat just outside Savannah, down a winding road lined with live oaks and lazy moss that fluttered like old lace. It wasn't large, but it was ours. There were no cameras, no logbooks, no voices behind doors whispering control. Each morning, I made tea while Isolde sat at the kitchen table, tracing letters in her workbook. We went to the same therapist every Wednesday. She spoke more now, short phrases, some questions. Sometimes she didn't talk at all, and that was fine too. I started tutoring again. A neighbor, then a referral. Reading support, GED prep, helping kids with learning delays. It felt like coming back to a version of myself I hadn't realized I missed. The garden in back came alive slowly. I'd planted rosemary, thyme, tomatoes, and a patch of sunflowers for Isolde. She watered them daily, not because I asked her to, because she wanted to. One afternoon, a large envelope arrived by mail. It was from family court. I opened it sitting on the porch swing, Isolde reading nearby, with her shoes kicked off in the grass. The paper inside was simple. It stated that I had been awarded full legal guardianship of Isolde Montgomery, permanently. No hearings, no objections. Vera had defaulted. Gideon never filed a response. It was over. I folded the document and looked at Isolde. She didn't know yet, but she would. And she'd smile. I was sure of it. Later that day, I checked the mailbox again, not because I expected anything urgent, but because I still half hoped a letter might come. Some word from Cressida, a line from Gideon, even a blank card from Vera would have meant something. But the box was empty. Maybe it was better that way. Clean. Final. I unpacked the last moving box that evening. At the bottom sat an old family photo. Thanksgiving? Probably 2009. All of us around the long table. Cressida pouring wine. Gideon mid-laugh. Vera turned perfectly to camera. James distracted. Me at the end, holding a plate I never got to serve. I almost threw it away, but something stopped me. I slipped it into a drawer. Not out of longing, just closure. The next week, I began volunteering at the local literacy center. There was this woman, Geraldine, late 60s, former nurse. She came in 3 times a week to learn how to read novels she'd faked her way through for decades. Sometimes we don't need closure, she told me after one of our sessions. We just need freedom. That sentence clung to me for days. One evening near sunset, I was in the backyard digging out a spot for basil when Isolde walked up behind me. She crouched beside me, silent. I handed her the trowel. She didn't use it. Instead, she put her small hand on my shoulder and whispered, "You saved me." I froze. The sun hit her face in soft gold. Her eyes didn't blink. Her voice didn't tremble. I knelt down to her level and looked her straight in the eye. "No," I said gently. "You saved yourself. I just saw you." She nodded and smiled, not wide, but deep. And I realized, for the first time in years, I had nothing left to prove. But even in freedom, justice still had one more stop to make. The courthouse was packed. Lawyers, reporters, 2 deputies at the back wall. I stood alone at the front, my palms resting against the edge of the table. Delaney had prepared every angle, but this part was mine. Testifying. Out loud. No notes. No lawyer to speak for me. The judge looked down from the bench, her face unreadable. "Ms. Dalton, you may proceed." I didn't stutter. I told them about the files, the fake reports, the silence Isolde had been trained into. I didn't dramatize. I didn't plead. I spoke plainly. Honestly. When I finished, the room was still. The judge nodded slowly and spoke, voice clear. "This court finds Vera Montgomery and Gideon Montgomery guilty of child endangerment, medical fraud, and financial exploitation. Sentencing will be scheduled." Vera, seated to my left, collapsed into sobs. Loud, unfiltered. The kind that expected sympathy. Gideon didn't move, didn't blink, didn't look at me once. I didn't flinch. I'd stopped needing his gaze a long time ago. On the way out of the courtroom, I paused at the top of the stairs. Gideon stood alone near the window, hands in his pockets, jaw tight. The light cast sharp angles on his face, too sharp to hide behind. I walked up to him and handed him a sealed envelope. "Something for you," I said. He opened it, and when his eyes reached the signature at the bottom, I saw it. Not fear, just stillness. James's name, in black ink, confirmed it all. That Gideon had orchestrated the finances, the medical cover-ups, the threats. That this had never been about one child. It had always been about control. "You built your life on fear," I said. "I just dismantled it with the truth." I didn't wait for a reply. There wasn't one that would have mattered. In the weeks that followed, the story spread beyond state lines. Headlines read, "Abuse behind the gate. Family secrets exposed." I was asked to speak at a child advocacy conference in Atlanta. I said yes, not because I wanted to talk, but because it was time people listened. On stage, I wore no script. Silence was never safety, I told them. It was submission dressed as loyalty. People applauded. Some cried, others sat still. But I saw them. Survivors. Witnesses. The ones who never got to say it out loud. Back home, life settled into something gentle. Isolde started at a new school, small class sizes, trauma-trained teachers, and a girl named Delia who shared her lunch every Thursday. I'd watch them from a bench, coffee in hand, heart full of something that felt suspiciously like peace. One evening, I found a letter in the mailbox. It was from Cressida. One sentence, scrawled in her narrow cursive, "May I see her one last time?" I didn't tell Isolde. I met my mother alone at the park, where we used to picnic when I was a child. She sat on the same bench we used to fight over. "I thought legacy meant preserving the name," she said, "but you rewrote it." I looked her straight in the eye. "You wanted a legacy. This is mine now." She didn't argue. She didn't apologize. She stood and walked away without another word. And that was fine. A week later, Isolde and I visited Tybee Island. She ran ahead of me barefoot, squealing when the tide caught her ankles. I followed at a slower pace, feeling the pull of the sea on my calves. We knelt and wrote our names in the sand. Isolde, Maura. The waves rolled in a few minutes later, washing them away. Some endings don't need fireworks, just freedom.